Wednesdays this fall, Stephen Bochco's.
Yes, that's right. Elvis Presley.
Sure you want to go on television? People are eating, you know.
They filled our living rooms with wonder, laughter, and comfort, then vanished from memory like they were never there at all. What happened to the Sunday shows that once defined our weekends, and why does their silence feel so personal now? NBC Sunday Showcase was not just a television program, it was a statement. It ran from 1959 to 1960 and was one of the first shows to dare to go big, bold, and in color at a time when most American homes were still adjusting to the idea that their television sets could be more than black and white. It was an anthology series, which meant it never stuck to one story, one cast, or even one genre. One week you would get a sweeping musical, and the next a gripping science fiction drama. It was television trying to be theater. Or maybe it was television becoming theater. The episode What Makes Sammy Run turned heads, but it was Murder and the Android that quietly earned a Hugo Award nomination and whispered something new into the ears of its audience, that science fiction could belong on television too. But the truth was, Sunday nights were a battleground, and even ambition was not enough to keep it alive. It faded quickly, not because it failed, but because it tried too much, too soon. Now it lives as a name in the margins of television history, waiting to be remembered by someone who once sat too close to the screen, eyes wide open, watching the future flicker into being. The Chevy Mystery Show aired in the summer of 1960, when the days were long and television felt like a friend you checked in with every night before bed. At first glance, it might have seemed like just another crime drama anthology, but there was something darker lurking in its shadows. Hosted initially by Walter Slezak and then passed off to Vincent Price, yes, that Vincent Price, the show had a way of crawling under your skin. It did not just entertain, it unsettled. These were not tidy detective puzzles wrapped in polite endings. These were tales where justice did not always feel like justice, and good people did not always win. What people do not realize today is that this quiet little program on a quiet summer night introduced America to something that would eventually become a household name, Lieutenant Columbo. His first version appeared here, in the episode titled Enough Rope, long before Peter Falk's iconic performance. But the moment did not linger. The show vanished just as quickly as it arrived, as if it had only been passing through. It was the kind of show your parents vaguely remember, if they remember it at all. But its fingerprints are still all over the crime dramas we watch today, hidden, uncredited, and nearly forgotten. Out of This World was the kind of show that could only exist in the 80s, a sitcom about a teenage girl who discovers on her 13th birthday that her father is an alien and she has supernatural powers. That sounds like something you'd find in the last row of a dusty VHS bargain bin, and honestly, that's the charm. This show somehow managed to blend heartwarming family moments, slapstick comedy, and intergalactic weirdness, all in one neon-washed package. It aired in syndication, which meant it never had a consistent time slot, but Sundays were a regular go-to in a lot of local markets. The lead character, Evie, had the power to freeze time by touching her index fingers together, a trick that was used so often it became one of the most recognizable gags of the show. The real kicker? Her alien dad, who you never actually saw, spoke to her through a glowing cube and was voiced by Burt Reynolds. Yes, that Burt Reynolds. It ran for 4 seasons, but because it was never a network darling and never had rerun deals, it kind of disappeared once the final episode aired. Ask anyone who remembers it and they'll light up with nostalgia, then immediately question if it was a dream. It was campy. It was bizarre. And it was something truly, uniquely 80s. Out of This World might have vanished from the spotlight, but for those who saw it, it never left their memories. Super Train was a show that promised the future and delivered a train wreck. Literally. Picture this, a massive nuclear-powered train that had everything from gyms to swimming pools to full-blown nightclubs, speeding across America like a landlocked spaceship. It was NBC's answer to The Love Boat, except instead of a cruise, you were on rails. And instead of smooth sailing, it was a multi-million-dollar gamble that crashed and burned faster than anyone expected. The production budget was astronomical for its time, higher than anything else on television in 1979. They even built a giant set and miniature models for the train itself. But viewers, they just didn't show up. The stories on board were supposed to be romantic and dramatic and weekly anthologies, but the scripts were flat and the characters forgettable. It aired on Sunday nights, and NBC had high hopes that it would become the next big thing. Instead, Super Train became the poster child for overambition. Critics tore it apart, and within a few months, it was gone. Still, for a show that failed so spectacularly, it left behind something rare. Footage that looks like retrofuturism exploded all over your screen. It's wild, lavish sets, bright lights, an entire casino inside a train. You cannot look away. It's hard not to respect just how bold it was, even if it collapsed under its own weight. Super Train was flashy, short-lived, and unforgettable for all the wrong, and maybe just a few right, reasons. Rags to Riches was the kind of show that could only exist in a moment where the world still believed a musical number could solve every problem. Airing on NBC from 1987 to 1988, it was basically Annie Meets the Brady Bunch with a splash of grease, all set to the tune of early 60s rock and roll. The plot? A wealthy businessman randomly adopts 6 orphan girls and moves them into his mansion. Cue the family bonding. Cue the chaos. Cue the songs. Each episode followed a dramatic storyline, usually involving friendship, growing pains, or the threat of losing their new home. And every storyline came with at least 2 classic musical performances, except they didn't sing the originals. They rewrote the lyrics to fit the plot. So instead of singing "My Boyfriend's Back," they'd sing "My Sister's Mad," or something that somehow worked in a subplot about report cards. It sounds ridiculous, and maybe it was, but it also hit a sweet spot of television magic that made it perfect Sunday night comfort food. It only ran for 2 seasons, but it made a massive impact on the kids and families who tuned in. You'll find clips online now that feel like time capsules, all teased hair, neon tights, and hard-on-your-sleeve sincerity. Rags to Riches didn't care if you thought it was cheesy. That was the whole point. It was pure optimism, wrapped in a melody, just when people needed it most. The Bigelow Theater was one of those brief glimmers in television history that seemed to burn too brightly and too fast. Airing from 1950 to 1951, it lived a strange dual life, first as a CBS anthology drama and later repackaged for Dumont under various names. At its core, it was a stage for stories, real ones, deep ones, sometimes even a little too ambitious for their times. Each episode was a self-contained play, complete with rising tension and dramatic conclusions that tried to stretch the television format beyond its early limits. But here's what sets it apart: the talent it attracted. A young James Dean appeared on it before he became legend. George C. Scott showed up long before anyone called him iconic. For one brief, shining moment, the Bigelow Theater was a springboard for greatness. It was the kind of show that didn't just cast actors, it captured them at the edge of becoming icons. There was a rawness in the performances, a feeling that no one quite knew they were making history. Every episode felt like a rehearsal for something much bigger, but no less sincere. And because of that, it became a quiet archive of American talent right before it exploded. But it never quite caught the public's imagination in the way its network hoped. It lacked flash. It asked its viewers to pay attention, to feel something. That was a lot to ask from a post-war America that just wanted to laugh or sing. And so it faded, quietly, almost politely, into television's attic of forgotten names. But those performances, those early, trembling moments of greatness, they remain buried in dusty kinescopes, just waiting for someone to remember. There are certain shows that live in the very bones of American pop culture, and The Ed Sullivan Show is one of them. It ran for over 2 decades, from 1948 to 1971, and if you watched television on a Sunday night during those years, chances are Ed Sullivan was part of your weekly rhythm. It was a variety show, yes, but calling it just that feels too small. It was where America saw the Beatles for the first time. It was where Elvis Presley became dangerous, where ventriloquists, dancers, comedians, and opera singers somehow all fit under one spotlight. Ed Sullivan himself was famously stiff, famously awkward, and somehow perfect. He introduced the country to new talent with that signature delivery, and he made Sunday night feel like an event. There was a weight to every booking, like he knew it might shape the future. You did not just see stars, you watched them become immortal. Whether it was a shaky stand-up comic or a fresh-faced rock band, Sullivan gave them the biggest stage in America. And in doing so, he gave us permission to fall in love with something new. But time is cruel, and memory is selective. The black and white glow of the Ed Sullivan Show has dimmed over the years, especially for younger generations who grew up in color. They know the names, but not the feeling. They know the clips, but not the build-up. That moment when the whole family leaned in, waiting to see who Ed had lined up next. Now, the footage lives on in compilations and documentaries, and the stage he made legendary is mostly a footnote. But for a time, it was the heartbeat of America's living rooms. The Colgate Comedy Hour was not just another variety show, it was an event. Airing live from 1950 to 1955, it brought the electric chaos of the stage directly into the homes of millions. Hosted by a rotating cast of comedy legends like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, Eddie Cantor, and Abbott and Costello, the show captured a kind of energy that no scripted sitcom ever could. It was unpredictable, unpolished, and wildly entertaining. Every week was a gamble, a new experiment in whether or not the comedians could top their last performance. And more often than not, they did. It was a golden age of television in the raw, where mistakes happened on air and the audience loved it more for that. You felt the tension in every live performance. Anything could go wrong, and sometimes it did. But that chaos made it human, alive, and impossible to turn away from. It was the only place where you could see slapstick, song, and celebrity all within the same breath. And at its best, it felt like the whole country was in on the joke at the same time. The competition with the Ed Sullivan Show was fierce, and at times it looked like Colgate might actually win. But time plays favorites, and while Ed Sullivan became immortal, Colgate Comedy Hour became something else, a memory. It disappeared almost as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving only clips and scattered references behind. Yet for those who watched it, those Sunday nights were unforgettable. You did not just laugh, you roared. You shouted across the room. You felt alive. It was theater, comedy, and chaos wrapped into 1 hour of brilliance. The 20th Century Fox Hour was a short-lived attempt to bridge the golden age of cinema with the golden glow of television. Running from 1955 to 1957, it was an anthology series that adapted well-known films and original stories into hour-long television dramas. It was elegant. It was cinematic. It tried to carry the weight of the studio's name on its back and bring it straight into your living room. Each episode had a familiar polish to it, like watching a condensed movie but with all the grandeur still intact. Famous stories were trimmed down to fit into 60 minutes, and new dramas tried their best to live up to the brand that preceded them. Some succeeded, some did not. But even when it missed with grace. The lighting, the music, the framing, it all felt like a miniature film festival delivered to your living room. You did not watch it to laugh or relax, you watched it to watch. It reminded people that television could be art, not just noise. But every Sunday, viewers knew they were getting something a little more refined, a little more serious. In a world of variety shows and slapstick, the 20th Century Fox Hour felt like a whisper from the movie theater down the street. It was classy without being cold, dramatic without being dull. But the formula proved hard to sustain. The rise of sitcoms, westerns, and science fiction made its slower pacing feel out of step. Eventually, it quietly faded, unable to compete with the flashier new kids on the block. But it left behind a strange elegance, a kind of dignity that other shows rarely aimed for. The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis was not your average teenage sitcom. It aired from 1959 to 1963 and had one of the most unique voices of its time. This was a show about a lovesick young man who talked directly to the camera, breaking the fourth wall long before it became a storytelling trend. Dobie was charming, hopelessly romantic, and always entangled in some absurd scheme to win over the girl of the week. But what made the show stand out even more was the presence of Maynard G. Krebs, played by Bob Denver, a beatnik sidekick who recoiled at the word work and became a cultural icon in his own right. The show was funny, sharp, and smarter than it often got credit for. It touched on real themes of class, ambition, and teenage rebellion, all wrapped in a light-hearted, lovable package. Dobie wasn't a rebel or a genius. He was something rarer, a sincere dreamer. He wanted love, he wanted meaning, and he wanted it without irony. It was the first time television said it was okay to be awkward, poetic, and hopeful at once. And it let teenagers be foolish without making them the punchline. It gave American youth a voice, an oddball voice maybe, but a voice nonetheless. Over time, though, it was overtaken by louder, brighter comedies and the rise of more dramatic fare. Dobie faded into the background, his monologues forgotten, his daydreams replaced by different kinds of heroes. But if you watched it, really watched it, you remember the warmth, the honesty, the way it made being young feel both ridiculous and profound. The Texas Wheelers was a sitcom that aired for a blink in time, just 4 episodes in 1974 before it disappeared from the airwaves. It told the story of a widowed father, Zach Wheeler, played by Jack Elam, trying to raise his 4 kids in rural Texas after returning home. The tone was rough around the edges but warm at the core, an unusual blend of grit and sentiment. One of the kids was played by a young Mark Hamill just before the world would know him as Luke Skywalker. But even that bit of trivia was not enough to save the show. It premiered during a time when audiences were craving escapism, not slice-of-life realism wrapped in Southern grit. The laugh track felt out of place. The characters talked more than they joked. There was a quiet honesty in every scene, moments that felt like they came from someone's real life, not a writer's room. The show made no effort to dazzle or distract. It just wanted to sit with you and tell the truth. It was less about punchlines and more about pauses, silences, and hard-earned smiles. And instead of punchlines, there were long, quiet moments of reflection. Maybe too many. The Texas Wheelers did not fail because it was bad. It failed because it was honest. And in 1974, honest sitcoms did not get very far. But those who remember it remember something rare. A network show that tried to say something deeper under its dusty boots and denim jackets. It had an emotional backbone. It wanted to show how family bonds are messy, complicated, and not always tied together with a neat bow. Its cancellation felt like closing the book before the first chapter was over. Yet in those few episodes, there was something sincere, something that lingers, the kind of sincerity that could only be appreciated years later. Aliens in the Family was one of those shows that made you do a double take. Part puppet show, part live-action sitcom, it was a science fiction oddity that aired on ABC in 1996. It followed a blended family, half human, half alien, trying to live together under one roof. Think The Brady Bunch meets The Muppets, with a dash of outer space weirdness. It was colorful, chaotic, and completely offbeat, and audiences had no idea what to do with it. Children were confused, parents were indifferent, critics were baffled. The puppet characters, created by Jim Henson's Creature Shop, were impressive, but the tone of the show constantly bounced between wacky and heartfelt, never quite landing on either. One moment, you had alien dad jokes and slapstick burps, and the next, you had tearful lessons about acceptance and identity. It didn't just blur tones, it erased the lines completely. In doing so, it gave some kids their first glimpse of what it meant to feel different and still be loved. The jokes often missed. The emotional moments felt too strange to sink in. But under all the eccentricity was something unique, an attempt to talk about blended families, about difference and acceptance, through the lens of weird intergalactic humor. It was bold. Too bold, maybe. Only a handful of episodes aired before it was quietly pulled from the schedule. It has since become a punchline in weird TV retrospectives. But there is a generation of viewers who caught those few episodes wide-eyed, wondering if they had imagined the whole thing. For them, it was not just bizarre, it was oddly touching. The show tried to say something about what makes a family and how love looks different across space and species. Prophet was not just ahead of its time, it felt like it had fallen in from another dimension. Airing briefly in 1996, the show followed Jim Prophet, a cold, calculating corporate executive who manipulated everyone around him to rise through the ranks. He slept in a cardboard box, spoke directly to the camera, and treated his job like a game of psychological warfare. Audiences did not know what to make of it. This was the same decade that gave us Friends and Frasier, shows built on warmth, laughter, and ensemble charm. Prophet was the opposite. It was cold, cynical, and daring. Too daring. It was canceled after only a few episodes, with critics divided and networks scared. He was the snake in the boardroom, charismatic, empty-eyed, and terrifyingly believable. The show didn't just critique capitalism, it made you feel complicit in it. It asked the kind of questions no one wanted to answer, especially during prime time. But years later, something strange happened. Prophet developed a cult following. People began to see it as the prototype for the morally ambiguous anti-heroes who would define television in the 2000s. Characters like Tony Soprano, Don Draper, and Walter White. In hindsight, it was not just edgy for the sake of it. It was visionary. The show explored themes of corporate corruption, trauma, and identity with unsettling depth. And Adrian Pasdar's performance as Prophet remains chilling and magnetic. It was television holding up a mirror to ambition and daring us not to look away. But in 1996, America blinked, and the show was gone. Still, the market left has never fully faded. It's a Living had a simple premise: 6 waitresses working at a swanky restaurant on top of a Los Angeles skyscraper, juggling tips, tough customers, and each other. It ran for nearly a decade, first on ABC and then in syndication, from 1980 to 1989. But despite its long life, it somehow fell through the cracks of television history. Maybe it was because the cast changed more than once. Maybe it was because people did not know how to market a show that was about working women, but not as flashy as Charlie's Angels or as dramatic as Dynasty. It was funny, it was sharp, and it gave voice to the struggles of service workers in a way few sitcoms ever have. These were not rich characters. They were real. They clocked in tired, left exhausted, and still found reasons to laugh in between. Each joke landed because it came from a place of lived-in truth, not punchline formulas. The show was less about drama and more about dignity. They argued, supported each other, and occasionally broke down in the break room. The comedy came from the grind, the awkward tables, the demanding guests, the tired feet. And while it had plenty of laughs, it never made fun of their lives. It respected them. That quiet dignity is why It's a Living still resonates with the people who remember it. But syndication does strange things to memory. Shows become familiar, but fuzzy, important, but unspecific. It lived in reruns and then disappeared. And now, it is a name people say with a vague sense of recognition, like something they dreamed about once. But behind that name was something brave, something real, something that showed working women without glamour, but with grit. Beauty and the Beast was a fairy tale set in a world of concrete and shadows. From 1987 to 1990, it told the story of Catherine, a lawyer in New York City, and Vincent, a noble beast living beneath the streets in a hidden world. Linda Hamilton brought strength to Catherine, while Ron Perlman, under layers of prosthetics, gave Vincent a quiet, poetic soul. Their love was forbidden, impossible, and entirely real. The show combined crime drama with fantasy, romance with action. It should not have worked, but it did. It spoke to something deep in its audience, a longing for connection in a world that felt increasingly cold. The underground world Vincent lived in was not just a fantasy setting, it was a metaphor for safety, for community, for a different kind of beauty. The show whispered that love could exist without conditions, without judgment, even without surface-level attraction. It did not mock emotion. It embraced it like something sacred. And in doing so, it gave viewers permission to believe in gentleness, even in a brutal world. Beauty and the Beast earned a devoted fan base, one that continues to cherish the show today. But in the mainstream, it has faded. Newer generations barely know it existed, and that is a shame, because for all its melodrama and mythical flourishes, it was sincere. It believed in love without irony. It dared to show vulnerability in a genre that often avoided it. Sliders was one of those rare science fiction shows that handed its audience the keys to the multiverse and then quietly slipped out the back door. Premiering in 1995, the series followed a group of travelers who slid between parallel universes, each one slightly or wildly different from their own. It was clever, imaginative, and packed with potential. One world would be ruled by technology, another by communism. Some were utopias, most were nightmares. The concept was lightning in a bottle. But television, as always, is complicated. Behind the scenes, the show was plagued by network meddling, cast changes, and creative clashes. What started as thoughtful science fiction turned slowly into formulaic adventure. One of the show's greatest strengths was its premise. What if one decision created a whole new world? That idea alone had enough weight to carry 10 seasons, if not more. But too often, the show's smartest ideas got buried beneath budget cuts and behind-the-scenes drama. It bounced from Fox to the Sci-Fi Channel, and in the process, lost its rhythm. Characters were written off, the tone shifted, and that initial sense of wonder, the thrill of infinite possibilities, got buried under clunky plot lines. Still, for those who watched it, Sliders was unforgettable. The idea that there were versions of our world just a step away lit up the imagination. It made you question the smallest choices. The what-ifs. The roads not taken. And even now, in a media landscape drowning in multiverse stories, Sliders is rarely mentioned. It was a pioneer without a monument. A bold idea that came before audiences were ready and was gone before they could catch up. Baywatch Nights was a spin-off that should have never worked, and in the end, it didn't. Airing from 1995 to 1997, it began as a detective drama starring David Hasselhoff's character from Baywatch, now moonlighting as a private investigator. But somewhere along the way, someone had a wild idea. What if it was supernatural? By its second season, the show had shifted into full X-Files territory, with Hasselhoff chasing ghosts, sea monsters, and other unexplainable threats under the moonlight. The tone was bizarre. The writing even more so. And while Baywatch thrived on sun and surf, Baywatch Nights traded it for fog machines and fear. Audiences were baffled. There were alien conspiracies, demon possessions, and episodes that felt like fever dreams. It was less a spin-off and more a genre-bending experiment in identity crisis. But hidden inside that chaos was a wild kind of courage, to throw everything safe away and start again. The camp factor went through the roof, but without the self-awareness to pull it off. Still, it tried. It tried to be different, to evolve, to turn a sun-soaked brand into something shadowy and strange. But that leap was too big. Ratings plummeted, and by 1997, it was quietly canceled, swallowed by the very darkness it tried to explore. Today, it exists more as trivia than memory. A weird side note in the legacy of one of the most watched shows in television history. But there's something oddly admirable about it. It dared to transform, to chase the unknown. And even if it stumbled, it did so with conviction. Cop Rock may be one of the strangest experiments ever aired on network television. Premiering in 1990, it was an audacious fusion of gritty police drama and full-blown Broadway musical. Imagine officers discussing a brutal arrest and then breaking into a choreographed song about the criminal justice system. That was the show. It was created by Steven Bochco, the mind behind acclaimed dramas like Hill Street Blues and NYPD Blue. And maybe that was the problem. Audiences expected hard-hitting realism, not musical numbers performed in a courtroom. The shift was jarring, Each week, viewers were asked to suspend belief not just for a case, but for a genre. 1 minute, a detective was interrogating a suspect, and the next, a gospel choir was singing about corruption. It wasn't satire, it wasn't camp, it was earnest, and that confused people even more. The show wasn't trying to be funny, it was trying to be groundbreaking. The songs were sometimes moving, often bizarre, and always unexpected. Critics did not know what to make of it. Some called it brave, others called it a disaster. Most just stared, baffled. Ratings tanked. After 11 episodes, it was gone. But in that brief, bewildering season, something bold happened. Cop Rock tried to do what no show had done before, or has done since. It blurred the lines between storytelling and spectacle, and it refused to apologize for it. Today, it's often mocked, sometimes defended, but rarely forgotten by those who saw it. It was television taking a huge swing, and sure, it missed. But it swung. And in a world of safe formulas and endless reboots, that matters. The Ben Stiller Show was where sarcasm met sincerity, sketch met structure, and comedy took a slightly weirder turn. It aired in various forms from 1992 to 1995, first on MTV and later on Fox, but barely lasted a season in either place. Still, for those who caught it, it felt like something new. Ben Stiller, then just beginning his rise, hosted and led the sketches, joined by future legends like Janeane Garofalo, Andy Dick, and Bob Odenkirk. The writing was sharp, offbeat, and unafraid to punch both up and sideways. It parodied pop culture with a precision that felt less like ridicule and more like dissection. But it was too niche, too weird, too smart for a mass audience that was still tuned into sitcom comfort food. There was a sketch where Ben played Tom Cruise in a fake action movie trailer, and it felt more accurate than the real thing. The humor was meta before meta was a buzzword. You weren't just laughing, you were being let in on a creative secret. Ratings never clicked. Fox pulled the plug, but the echoes of its style, fast edits, character-driven absurdity, and deep-cut satire are all over modern comedy. In many ways, it was a blueprint, a test run for what would become the tone of shows like Mr. Show, The Office, or even sketch segments on late night. The Ben Stiller Show proved that comedy could be thoughtful without being preachy, and even though it was gone in a flash, it left behind a creative footprint that never really faded. My So-Called Life was not a television show. It was a mirror. Aired from 1994 to 1995, it lasted just one season, but that was enough to carve out a permanent place in the hearts of anyone who watched it. It followed Angela Chase, a teenager played with aching realism by Claire Danes, as she stumbled through school, family, friendships, and identity. The dialogue was awkward, raw, and beautifully human. There were no laugh tracks, no tidy resolutions. It captured adolescence in a way that felt too real for comfort, especially in an era dominated by polished, sanitized teen dramas. The show tackled issues like homophobia, drug use, and domestic tension with an honesty that rarely made it to air. Critics praised it, viewers adored it. There's a moment where Angela watches her crush from across the hallway, and it's dead silent, just her face and our hearts breaking with her. The silence in that show said more than most network dramas say with a full orchestra. It understood that teenage pain isn't exaggerated. It's just rarely taken seriously. But ratings were lukewarm and networks were impatient. It was canceled after 19 episodes. Still, its legacy lives on. Every teen drama that dares to get serious owes a quiet debt to My So-Called Life. It had the setting, it had the potential, it even made history. The Corner Bar was a sitcom set in a modest New York watering hole, a familiar formula with a twist. It featured one of the first recurring gay characters on American television. Peter Panama, played by Vincent Schiavelli, was quietly groundbreaking. But the show around him never quite matched the boldness of that casting. Week after week, it shuffled between quirky patrons, minor hijinks, and barroom chatter that often felt more like background noise than plot. ABC hoped it would be a hit in the style of Cheers, before Cheers existed. But the writing lacked the snap. The characters blurred together. The bar, instead of feeling lived in, felt like a stage set waiting for the real show to begin. Audiences did not connect. Ratings dropped. The cast changed. The show was retooled for a second season with a new owner and different characters, but it still could not find its voice. After 2 brief seasons, it disappeared with little fanfare. And yet, for that one quiet step forward in representation, it remains part of television history. Not for being great, not even for being good, but for daring, however briefly, to show someone different. The corner bar might not have lasted, but it cracked the door open. That matters, even if everything else around it faded. Sometimes a show does not just entertain, it teaches you how to believe in your own voice. Ghost Rider was like that. It was a mystery series for kids, but it hit deeper than most adult shows dared. Set in Brooklyn, the series followed a diverse group of young friends who solved real mysteries with the help of a ghost, one who could only communicate through written words. He was not scary. He was not loud. He was a presence, a guide, a friend. And through him, Ghost Rider taught an entire generation that reading and writing were not just school assignments, they were power. The characters, from Jamal to Lenny to Alex and Gabby, were smart and real. They dealt with school pressure, identity, and fear, and still found time to solve crimes in their spare time. The show respected its viewers. It never talked down to kids. It treated them as thinkers, as questioners, as collaborators in a world that often overlooked their voices, and that made it feel like magic. But for all its quality and meaning, Ghost Rider never got the love it deserved. Maybe it was too educational. Maybe it was too sincere. Whatever the reason, it vanished after 3 seasons, leaving behind a trail of haunted keyboards and half-remembered clues. Still, for those who watched, it lit something inside. A belief that your words mattered, that your questions were worth asking, and that maybe, just maybe, something unseen was always helping you figure it all out. Taran Noah Smith was the youngest son in Home Improvement, the awkward, often forgotten middle child of the Taylor family. He grew up on screen, his voice deepening as the seasons passed, his expressions maturing as America watched from their living rooms. But behind the jokes and tool puns was a boy who never asked for any of it. Fame was something that happened to him, never something he chased. When the show ended, Taran was just 17 years old. He did not celebrate his Hollywood success. He walked away from it, completely. He distanced himself from the industry, from the money, from the spotlight. Instead, he turned towards something far more grounded: veganism, sustainable living, building homes with alternative materials, and running a food company that served organic meals to schools. While others searched for ways back into television, Taran planted his feet firmly in the soil, literally. His story is not flashy, it is not headline-grabbing, but it is powerful. He has spoken about how alienating childhood fame can be, how it distorts your sense of self, your future, your place in the world. Taran did not want to be remembered for punchlines or reruns. He wanted to build something real. And while the world may have forgotten his name, it is clear he never forgot who he was. There is something beautiful about a child star who grows up and becomes exactly who they needed when they were young. Taran Noah Smith disappeared from our screens, but maybe that is because he found a better way to show up in the world. There was something disarmingly genuine about brotherly love. Maybe it was because the 3 brothers on screen, Joey, Matthew, and Andrew Lawrence, were real brothers in real life. Or maybe it was because the show never tried too hard. It just let the relationships speak for themselves. Set in Philadelphia, the series followed Joe Roman, a motorcycle-riding older brother who returns home after their father's death to help raise his 2 younger half-brothers and manage the family business. It was not flashy. It was not trying to reinvent the sitcom. It was just about a broken family trying to make things work. And somehow, that made it feel like everything. Joe was rough around the edges but protective. Matt was the overachiever with a heart too big for his age. Andy was the comic relief and the emotional glue. Together, they rebuilt more than just a business. They rebuilt trust. They rebuilt a family. Brotherly Love hit differently because it did not pretend everything was fine. It showed grief without drowning in it, laughter without ignoring the pain, and it gave kids and parents alike a rare glimpse into what it means to show up for people, even when it is messy, especially when it is messy. The show was short-lived, barely 2 seasons, but it carved out a quiet place in the hearts of anyone who ever lost something and had to figure out how to move forward, one day at a time. Not all love looks perfect. Sometimes it just looks like 3 brothers under one roof, doing the best they can. What starts as a romantic gesture ends up as one of the strangest sitcoms ever aired on American television. The Ugliest Girl in Town followed an American man who, in a desperate attempt to stay close to a British woman he loved, disguised himself as a female fashion model and found unexpected success in London. That is the premise. And yes, it really aired in prime time. The show leaned heavily into slapstick humor and gender-bending gags that were already outdated before the first episode premiered. Audiences were confused. Critics were baffled. The series tried to be progressive, maybe even charming, but it landed squarely in the uncanny valley of cringe. The makeup and wigs were absurd, the character motivations paper-thin, and the tone all over the place. It neither respected nor understood the complexities of the themes it was playing with. And yet, ABC gave it 17 episodes, each one a surreal journey into a world where a man in a dress could somehow pass for a top model without anyone catching on. Viewers did not buy it. The laughs were forced, the cultural pushback quiet but firm. It was not offensive in the way some shows are, it was just tone-deaf. Oddly cheerful about a premise that probably should have stayed a sketch instead of a series. Over time, it became a punchline in retrospectives about misguided television decisions. It is rarely re-aired, and for good reason. Some shows are forgotten because they were ahead of their time. This one was forgotten because even in its own time, it felt completely out of place. This show did not just imagine superpowers, it made you feel like they might happen to you next. The secret world of Alex Mack was every middle schooler's fantasy wrapped in a denim jacket and a bucket hat. When a normal girl named Alex is accidentally doused in a mysterious chemical, she gains powers. She can move things with her mind, shoot electricity from her fingers, and even melt into a puddle. But this was not some glossy superhero tale. Alex did not become famous or powerful. She became hunted, and afraid, and different. The show was about more than abilities. It was about the isolation of adolescence, about hiding who you are because the world is not ready, about balancing science homework with secret identities, friendship with fear. Alex was smart, brave, vulnerable, and deeply human. Her world was not filled with capes and explosions, but with skateboards, lockers, and the quiet terror of being discovered. There were corporations chasing her, best friends protecting her, and parents who had no idea what she was going through. That made it real. That made it hurt. The show resonated because it never glamorized its concept. It treated being special as a burden. And for kids feeling weird or out of place, that message was everything. When it ended after 4 seasons, it left behind more than a cliffhanger. It left behind a community of viewers who still wonder what happened to Alex and whether there is still magic hiding just beneath the surface of a normal life. Dana Plato was America's big sister. As Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes, she brought heart, warmth, and grace to a sitcom that dared to tackle hard truths. She smiled through the screen like someone who had it all together, but the truth behind her eyes told a different story. Fame came quickly, too quickly, and it never taught her how to hold on to herself. After Different Strokes, the offers stopped. The industry moved on. Dana did not. She fought hard to stay relevant, to find herself in a world that had already moved past her. Her choices became more desperate. She posed for tabloids, took roles she would rather forget. And all the while, the girl who once made us laugh was slowly unraveling. Addiction wrapped around her like a shadow she could not shake. She tried to get clean, tried to come back. but the pressure of being famous and forgotten is its own kind of poison. By 34, Dana Plato was gone. A tragic overdose ended her life, and with it, a chapter of television history that still feels unfinished. She died just a day after telling a radio show she was finally turning things around. We like to believe child stars live charmed lives. Dana reminded us that charm can be a mask, that behind every laugh track there might be a cry for help we cannot hear. Her story is not just a cautionary tale, it is a heartbreak that never quite stopped echoing. "You're under arrest, sugar." That was the catchphrase that made America sit up and take notice, if only briefly. Get Christy Love was revolutionary in its time, featuring one of television's first black female leads in a crime drama. Teresa Graves starred as Christy Love, an undercover detective in a world that was still figuring out how to talk about race, power, and gender. She was smart, tough, stylish, and unforgettable. The show was based loosely on a made-for-television movie, which drew major buzz. ABC thought they had the next big hit on their hands, and for a moment, it seemed like they did. But then the cracks began to show. The scripts were formulaic, the action routine, and the production values limited. Christy Love was meant to be bold, but the stories rarely let her break out of tired cliches. Behind the scenes, Graves, who had converted to a religious faith, refused to participate in any scenes she felt were too violent or provocative. Creative clashes followed. The network struggled to find the right tone. Ratings dipped, and by the end of its first season, the show was gone. What should have been a trailblazer was reduced to a footnote. Still, Christy Love carved out a place in history. She opened a door that had been shut for too long, even if she did not get to walk all the way through it. Today, she is remembered more for what she represented than for the plots she solved. A symbol of potential unrealized, a legend born from a show that never had the chance to grow. There was something sacred about 227, like a front porch conversation on a warm night that you did not want to end. It was not flashy. It did not need a catchphrase or an outrageous setting to keep your attention. It just gave you people, real people, laughing, arguing, leaning on each other through life's ordinary storms. Centered around Mary Jenkins and her neighbors in a Washington, D.C. apartment building, 227 gave African-American family life the center stage it had long been denied. And it did it with humor, grace, and strength. Mary was sharp and fiercely loyal, with a side eye that could shut down a room. Sandra Clark, her glamorous, sassy neighbor, lit up the screen in high heels and higher drama. But what made 227 matter was not just the characters, it was the culture it celebrated. Sunday dinners, hallway gossip, community struggles. It showed Black joy and Black resilience in a way that felt honest and rare. For many families, this was the first time they saw themselves on screen not as sidekicks or stereotypes, but as the stars. And yet, 227 quietly vanished. It ended not in scandal or protest, but in silence. The world moved on, and network television forgot the space it had once carved out. The stories stopped airing, but they never stopped mattering. Today, it is a name that gets a smile from those who remember, and a blank stare from those who do not. But for anyone who grew up with it, 227 was not just a sitcom. It was home. Corey Haim did not just define the 80s. He was the 80s. With his wild grin and soft vulnerability, he was the teen idol who made every awkward kid feel seen. The Lost Boys, Lucas, License to Drive, he was everywhere. And yet, at the height of his fame, Corey was already crumbling. The camera loved him. The system did not. Addiction found him early. Fame made it easier to hide. The sparkle that once made him shine started to look like a warning light no one wanted to notice. He tried to get clean, again and again. But the weight of being a star before you are even fully formed, it never really leaves. His friendship with Corey Feldman became its own tragic echo. Two kids trying to survive an industry that offered no protection. Corey Haim wanted so badly to be okay. You could see it in his interviews, in the way he talked about his childhood, about how he missed being a person, not a product. In 2010, he died from complications related to pneumonia. But everyone knew that the long war with addiction had written the earlier chapters. He was just 38, a boy frozen in time, never really given the space to grow up before the world asked too much of him. Corey Haim disappeared long before he died, and that may be the saddest part of all. The idea was magic. A group of travelers, scientists, teens, mystics, find themselves trapped in a mysterious dimension where time and reality break down. They search for a way home, journeying through a series of strange lands, each with its own rules, cultures, and dangers. That was The Fantastic Journey. A mix of science fiction and fantasy, it was a show that promised discovery, imagination, and adventure. But what it delivered was something far more chaotic. Despite an ambitious premise, the show was never given the time or budget it needed to build its world. Sets looked recycled. The effects were underwhelming. The writing swerved between philosophical and campy, often within the same episode. One week they were battling telepathic overlords, the next week they were navigating a land of forgotten civilizations. It felt like 3 different shows fighting for control. Characters were introduced and dropped. Storylines never paid off. Even the lead actor was changed mid-season. NBC had hoped for a ratings hit, but the show struggled to build a consistent audience. Viewers were intrigued but also confused. What was the journey, really? Where were they going? And why did it feel like the writers were just as lost as the characters? After only 10 episodes, The Fantastic Journey was canceled. But in those few hours, it captured something unique. A wild, unpolished attempt to blend science fiction with mythology and metaphysics. It did not succeed, but it did not completely fail either. For some, it still lingers as a vivid memory of what television used to try before it learned to play things safe. A weird, winding path through television's stranger corners. Few shows dared to be as gentle and raw as The Waltons. In a television landscape growing louder and flashier, this quiet drama about a rural Virginia family during the Great Depression and World War II was an act of rebellion. It reminded us that the world did not need to be big to feel important. Watching The Waltons felt like returning to a house you never lived in but still knew by heart. The opening narration was a hug. The goodnight scenes at the end of each episode were a lullaby. The series followed the tight-knit Walton family, 7 children, 2 parents, 2 grandparents, and turned their small victories and heartaches into epic truths. When John Boy chased his dream of becoming a writer, when Mary Ellen faced life after loss, when the family sat around a dinner table with barely enough food but more than enough love, it was more than a story. It was a reflection. Somehow, a show about a family from another era became the emotional backbone of real families watching together in the 70s. But time is cruel. As new decades arrived, the Waltons faded. The world moved faster, and it stopped looking back. Now it exists mostly in boxed DVD sets and the whispered memories of people who remember what real family television used to feel like. They do not make shows like this anymore, because maybe they think we no longer need them. But the truth is, we do. Maybe now more than ever. Michael Oliver was the kind of kid who could turn chaos into comedy. As Junior in Problem Child, he was everything the title promised. Wild, loud, hilarious, and just a little dangerous. He was not your typical sweet-faced Hollywood kid. He was a troublemaker you could not help but love. And then, like the perfect punchline to a joke we did not see coming, he was gone. His exit was sudden, but the signs were always there. The Problem Child films made money, but they also made problems. Legal disputes, managerial chaos, allegations of financial exploitation. Behind the scenes, Michael's world was unraveling before it even had a chance to begin. By the time he was a teenager, the industry had already burned him out. He did not just step away, he stepped back into anonymity. And he has rarely looked back. Today, Michael lives far from Hollywood's orbit. He is not trying to reclaim fame. He is not on reality shows or writing tell-all books. He is just living, quietly, on his terms. And that silence says more than any interview could. It says he chose peace over applause, privacy over profit. That may be the only happy ending left for a child actor is to become someone the world forgets. It is easy to think of these stars as lost, but maybe they are not lost at all. Maybe they just escaped. And in Michael's case, maybe disappearing was the bravest thing he ever did. This was not just a flop. It was a marathon of flops stretched over a single disastrous season. The Trouble with Tracy aired in Canada but made its way to the United States through syndication, where its legacy of failure quickly spread. The show was an attempt to create a daily sitcom, airing 5 days a week, modeled after successful American family comedies. But the pressure to churn out 130 episodes in a single year proved too much for its creators. Sets were reused until they literally fell apart. Scripts were recycled from old radio plays. Actors were given one take. Sometimes, if something went wrong, it simply stayed in the episode. Scenes with boom mics in frame, flubbed lines, dead silence where laughter should have been. It became less of a show and more of an endurance test, and yet people watched. Some because it was the only thing on, others out of sheer fascination. The show had a strange, chaotic charm, like watching live theater while the stage crumbles underfoot. Critics called it the worst sitcom ever made. Viewers did not necessarily disagree. But something about Tracy, her over-the-top optimism, the show's desperate energy, made it linger in memory. It is studied now not for its success but for its sheer audacity. A reminder that television is sometimes powered more by deadlines than inspiration. And when that happens, you get a show that feels like it is held together with tape and panic. The Trouble with Tracy was a mess, but it was a glorious, relentless mess, the kind you cannot look away from. This one did not need a script. An American Family was the first of its kind, a raw, unscripted look into the real life of a real family, the Louds. And America was not ready. When it aired in 1973, it shattered every idea we had about what family television meant. This was not fiction. This was not safe. The Loud family fought, cried, broke down on camera. We watched a marriage fall apart. We saw a son come out as gay on national television at a time when even saying the word was taboo. Viewers were shocked, some were angry, others felt seen for the first time. The Louds were not perfect, and that was the point. This was a mirror held up to the nation, and not everyone liked what they saw. The show only aired once, in a 13-part documentary format, but its ripples never stopped. It inspired decades of reality television, but none captured the raw honesty of this one. An American Family vanished not because it failed, but because it told the truth. A truth that television, and maybe the country itself, was not yet ready to hear. Watching it now is like opening an old wound. You see how far we have come, but also how far we have not. The Louds were just a family, but they were also a revolution. Jake Lloyd should have been remembered as a legend. After all, how many children can say they played Anakin Skywalker in one of the most anticipated films in cinema history? But instead of being celebrated, Jake became a warning. Star Wars, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace introduced the world to young Anakin, but it also introduced Jake to something far more dangerous than Sith Lords. Fame at that level was not a dream, it was a trap. Almost immediately, the backlash began. Critics tore into the film, viewers mocked his performance, kids at school bullied him relentlessly. Jake was not just ridiculed, he was targeted. The line between character and child was blurred so harshly that the person underneath began to vanish. He was only 10 years old, 10, and instead of protecting him, the industry left him behind. He did not just quit acting, he rejected it entirely. He destroyed his film memorabilia. He spoke of how toxic his experience had been. He wanted nothing to do with the world that had once promised him everything. In the years that followed, Jake struggled. With mental health, with the weight of a childhood that was not his own. There were moments of hope, followed by stories that made headlines for the wrong reasons. But none of them changed the core truth. He was a boy who never asked for the world to know his name, and when they did, it cost him everything. there is something deeply unfair about his story. A role that should have launched him into a lifetime of success became the reason he walked away. Or maybe ran. And now, all we are left with is silence and the question of what could have been. Some shows are ahead of their time, so much so that the world forgets them before it ever really saw them. Get Real was one of those shows. It was a single-season drama-comedy hybrid that pulled back the curtain on suburban life with startling honesty and heartache. It followed the Green family, imperfect, struggling, and achingly familiar. Parents trying to hold on to their marriage, teens trying to hold on to themselves. What made Get Real different was its courage to break the fourth wall. Characters would look straight into the camera and say the things we were too scared to admit, about fear, about love, about how hard it is just to be a person. Jesse Eisenberg played the awkward, sensitive son. Anne Hathaway, in one of her earliest roles, was the confident daughter cracking under quiet pressure. But it was not about star power. It was about emotional honesty. The show dared to be vulnerable at a time when television preferred gloss over grit. Every episode felt like opening a diary and reading what someone else was too afraid to say out loud. The kind that does not raise its voice to be heard. Each episode felt like a confession, a little too raw, a little too real. Maybe that is why it did not last. Viewers wanted resolution, but Get Real only offered reflection. And when it vanished, it left behind the kind of ache you feel when a good conversation ends too soon. Today, it is barely a footnote in TV history, but for those who watched, it was a whisper of truth in a world that usually just pretended. If one of these shows stirred something in you, share it below, and like, subscribe, and help us bring forgotten stories back to light.